Did The Simpsons predict Bush Jr. killing JFK Jr.?
Under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Buried deep, but we're breaking the locks. Footage got clipped, they erased all the shots. We stay connected dots. Under the docks, under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Yeah, under the docks.
Welcome back to Under the Docks. Paranoid American Sean Chris in our thankful giving month, JFK.
And we promised leftovers, and you're getting plenty of leftovers. This is going to be the tail end of the JFK month. I would highly recommend that you bring all of this up Thanksgiving dinner with all the friends and family. Ask Gam Gam what she thinks about JFK. She thinks the back of his head was missing or not. And this one is going to get way into the weeds, and we're going to try and break it down the best we can. This is JFK 2, The Bush Connection. And this came out in 2003, directed by John Hankey, not Hinckley, Hankey. And essentially, it's broken into 4 different segments. The first segment is called History is Written by the Winners, which is a weird paraphrasing of Napoleon. Part 2 is called Through the Looking Glass, Alice in Wonderland, obviously. Part 3 is Who Killed JFK. That one's a little obscure. I'm not sure what that means. And then part 4 is Deep History. So the first 3, by the way, you can kind of watch the first 3 parts of this movie and it feels like it ends, the credits roll and everything. And after the credits roll, then you get part 4, Deep History. And it sort of tells you, it's like, if you're still an idiot or if you're still like a newbie to this, don't even watch this part yet. Go back and watch the first 3 a few times until you get here. So in my mind, this is doing the opposite of what Oliver Stone's JFK Revisited did, which is where it takes very complex topics and it breaks them down so that if it's your first time learning about some of this, you can kind of catch on with it. This documentary, he explicitly states like, hey, a lot of this might go over your head. You might not be ready for this.
Yeah, he's a little smug, right? Through the whole thing and mockish of like his style of narrating. It's a unique style. I'll say that.
All right, let's plot the course for this one. This one makes a lot of claims, and usually I try and keep myself to like the top 5 or so, just in an effort of time. Well, we've already reviewed 2 different JFK documentaries at this point, and this one, the claims, they're going to bring up a lot of the similar things that we've kind of heard before, and we've gone into detail. So I'll keep these ones a little more brief, but there's way more of them. There's like at least 10 different claims here. So let's just pepper through some of these. The very first one, which I think was the motivation for John Hankey to create this documentary, is that there was a special on ABC News by Peter Jennings where he goes out to disprove these JFK assassination theories. And I think this was in the 90s or early 2000s. And it is clearly the catalyst because John Hankey has no uncertain words for what he thinks about Peter Jennings and ABC. And I think it was kind of like, oh, if you're going to say this, well, I need to make something that completely disproves what you're saying is just common knowledge now. So that's where this all starts out, is on the claim that Peter Jennings was falsely spreading more JFK propaganda decades after the event just to keep this story suppressed.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like a disgruntled viewer, right? And then at the age of where like, oh, I could put this out on the internet, right? He's like, I'm going to prove you wrong. It's like a back and forth of the debunking the debunker.
Which is sort of a interesting snapshot in time, right? Because if this happened in 95, yeah, people had the internet and computers, but they weren't recording 3-hour documentaries and uploading them on. It would have taken you 2.5 months to upload this thing somewhere. And who the hell is watching it, right? Everyone was downloading real-time clips of South Park episodes that you could barely even see unless you squinted your eyes. So this one was a little bit of like mess around, find out by Peter Jennings and ABC, where they realized too, I think, that maybe it's not the same world that existed during Mockingbird and during the 60s and 70s. This is a whole new animal. So I appreciate this documentary for that. That is specifically was created to counter this Peter Jennings report. One of the things that we haven't gone into in the previous 2 movies that we talked about was this concept that the driver of the motorcade, the one that was driving JFK, intentionally slows down. And in addition to him intentionally slowing down, the rest of the Secret Service members were told to stay away from the car so that they couldn't be in the way of this bullet. I'm sure that's not the example they were given, but they show the footage over and over again, and you can clearly see that one of the Secret Service guys in the back of the car is sort of told to stand down and jump off, and he kind of like throws his hands up in there, kind of like in frustration, like, all right, I don't understand what you're telling me, but I guess I'll follow orders. And then the car drives off. The whole part too about this driver intentionally slowing down, and I don't know. I mean, the claim is very specific. I don't know how much I understand or agree with this claim, but it's that the Zapruder film, the one that is famous, this is the JFK video footage, that it looks as though that all happens as the car is driving and moving, and then once the shot happens and they realize, it speeds off. But apparently there was a whole chunk of frames. There was like 10 frames cut from the Zapruder film that show that what actually happened is that the motorcade came to damn near a complete stop, and then JFK got shot, and then it starts moving again. So I guess the premise being that they intentionally lined this up so that all these different people could take their shots at a non-moving target.
Yeah, to almost present it as like, hey, we're always talking about it's a moving object, and the way they now premise it as he stopped, he's stationary, makes it much more likely that this would happen, and to really make sure that they get the shot off and that they're successful.
And speaking of getting the shot off and being successful, just like in the first documentary, I think that one said there was around like 15 shots. This one says there's about 13 shots, that there's still multiple shooters front and back and side. They had all of their bases covered for this thing to go off, and in case everyone missed, which they kind of did. So another one of the claims that this reemphasizes that we've heard so often is the autopsy was all faked, that JD Tibbets was used to swap in a JFK lookalike so that they had sort of a plan B, and then they botched the plan B as well, which is kind of Keystone Cops style that we talked about, and that 2 different groups of doctors 6 hours apart from each other had completely different descriptions of the wounds. So the doctors that see JFK's body and his head and his upper torso before he gets into the plane, and then the reports of what he looks like after he gets out of the plane, are completely different. And the only thing that was supposed to have been happening is a routine autopsy and a transport, not a complete, plastic makeover and glow up.
Yeah, and their claims of restructuring the cranium, like that they actually mashed it together like Play-Doh and rebuilt like a fake head upon his head to like position it to what they wanted it to look like because of the hole, but the blow from the back. And they were like, that's not his head. That's a whole different piece of it.
This is another weird one too that this movie did a decent job at, and this was the bullet hole that was apparently the official one that went through his back, that the actual shot was like closer to the back of his neck, but that this trajectory, I guess, didn't line up. And the Warren Commission, they move it down like 5 or 6 inches in the report. And then there's this discrepancy because someone's like, wait a minute, that's not where it was. It almost feels like there was a bargaining process where, the original reports are like, no, it was in like the upper back of his neck. And the Warren Commission's like, no, it was in his upper back. And they're like, let's just meet somewhere in the middle. And that's kind of what happens in the report, to where the report just like adjusts it just ever so slightly up so that the people complaining are like, okay, I can see what's happening here. I guess that's far enough. Don't put me in jail for bribery like you did with the JFK Secret Service agent that wouldn't shut up about any of this. Another one of the claims, and we're going to start getting into some unsubstantiated territory, by the way. One of the claims is that John Connolly, the guy that was in the car with JFK, that was on the receiving end of the, quote, magic bullet that went through his wrist and that ended up in his thigh, that he was in on it, and that he was meant to take part of that shot to just sell how realistic it looked a little bit. They don't really go into evidence of any kind of how he was related. The one thing they cite is that John Connolly is the one that brought George Bush Sr. into the White House. And then, in fact, he said that he wasn't going to join like a staff until they put George Bush in the White House first. So that's the only real connection. But it's a very specific claim that they make, is that John Connolly was in on this JFK assassination.
Yeah, that's where they kind of get in the weeds a little bit, right? Like, it's almost like the people that are like, yeah, he got paid to get knocked out. You're like, dude, you can literally die. So you're like, hey man, just shoot me, but try not to kill me. Make sure I'm not trusting that shot. I don't know about you. I don't even want to have the apple on my head when someone's doing an arrow. I'm not going to be like, yeah, for sure, bro. Like, I trust you. Just make it a flesh wound, okay? Like, make sure I'm not dead.
Well, plus after the fact, you're like, wait, there were 13 shots and one of them hit the windshield and one of them hit like a bridge. What were you guys doing? Like, yeah, you can't never trust the CIA when they're like, just be in the car, or you just need to sell it. Don't worry. We'll make sure it just goes through your wrist or something simple. Another one, and a lot of these are going to start just getting into unsubstantiated territory. But this is a classic conspiracy style documentary. One of the other claims is that and I want to be specific. It's not a claim as much as it's one of those open-ended questions where they're leading you to the claim without making it themselves. So the question is, was Nixon involved in the Kennedy assassination? And they point out that Jack Ruby was working for Congressman Nixon in 1947, so that there was a direct connection between Nixon and Ruby. And they go later on that Nixon was given his political power by Prescott Bush. So there's this weird chain of events where Prescott gets Nixon positioned into power, and then Nixon is able to get other people positioned into power. And then eventually, like, George Bush Sr. Comes up under these connections to Nixon. So again, we don't have the nice, and here's documentation, and here's a witness, and here's court records. We don't have any of that in this particular movie. We just have a bunch of open-ended questions, but that is the claim, is that there is a Nixon, Connolly, Bush connection that we're all orchestrating the JFK assassination to happen.
Loosely connected. Like, they don't, like you said, they don't back it up with documentation or plenty of other ways to, obviously they knew each other, right? So that's where some of these things lose me, when they're like, well, that guy was in the same room as that guy. So there has to be that they were connected. And you're like, all right, man, like.
Another one of those claims, and I'm going to have to save some of this for Hidden Treasures and Overboard, right? They're all going to, one of the claims was that Henry Ford and the Harriman brothers and the Rockefellers, we heard this in Everything's a Rich Man's Trick, that they were all Nazis and they all supported Hitler. Honestly, like, I'm on board with that. I don't even have to be sold on that so much. I feel like there's enough paper trail that show that sympathizing and funding, like, whatever you want to define it, like, they were making sure that the German war machine was well funded and had the resources it needed to continue doing what it was doing, even after everyone knew, like, the atrocities of war that were happening, right? So that's one of the claims. But what gets into a weird area, which we'll get into more in a second, but that J. Edgar Hoover is sort of a good guy superhero in the context of JFK to the Bush connection, that he was also aware that all these guys were Nazis, and that despite, and this is a quote from the movie, he had recently been criticized for being gay and a cross-dresser, this is J. Edgar Hoover, that you still have to respect that he investigated the Ford Harriman Rockefellers for collaborating with the Nazis. And he goes on the site that J. Edgar Hoover was instrumental in shutting down the Union Bank, which is where Prescott Bush was funneling all of this money into Germany. And so that it's almost, if you were to put this in like a Q framework, he's kind of painting J. Edgar Hoover as a cross-dressing white hat that's like, just trust the plan. You know, he's going to take all these guys down from the inside. But they also never cease. Whenever you see J. Edgar Hoover in this movie, he's wearing a dress. So it's like, let's not forget that this guy was a gay cross-dresser, but also he was fighting these Nazis. It's a weird, in my mind, it was like a hole that the director kind of put themselves in because he needed some sort of a white hat in the story to explain how certain things went wrong or didn't go according to the plan of like the all-powerful Illuminati.
The funny thing to me is that watching this and listening to the narrator, how he did the whole film, it was almost the beginning of this whole progressive left movement. Like you could tell he would, because obviously this film was done a long time ago. Like it wasn't like, but it's like this was the precursor. And it's interesting that a lot of these guys we have similar views on, like, obviously we both think that the JFK magic bullet theory is bullcrap, but the narrative of like, hey, LGBTQ XYZ is the reason we're not all under communism right now, almost. You know what I mean? Or Nazism.
You can definitely see that a lot of the influence in this movie, aside from the Peter Jennings thing, was created during the Bush two-term presidency. So there's a little bit of like Bush derangement syndrome that comes out in this. Now, I want to be clear. Personally, I do think that the Bush family was absolutely instrumental in the JFK assassination. However, a lot of that comes from the sources that this documentary cites, but they don't really do it justice. Like he cites the unauthorized biography of George Bush Sr., and a lot of like the Nazi connections and the Nixon connection and the JFK stuff, it comes directly out of that book. But again, he paraphrases it in a way that it doesn't do the book a lot of justice. However, he does go into, here's the 8th claim, was that Prescott Bush was in Skull and Bones. 100% true. So was George Bush Sr., so was George Bush Jr. That Zapata Oil just happened to be right outside of Cuba, this place called Que Sal, and that the Bay of Pigs was codenamed Operation Zapata. So you've got the Zapata Oil Corporation that's allegedly drilling for oil. This is where the Bush had reason to send George de Moranchill over to Cuba and to Haiti because he was, like, again, looking for oil. So all really just kind of reconnaissance stuff. And that the Bay of Pigs was named Operation Zapata after Zapata Oil. So he's drawn this connection that clearly the Bushes were involved with Bay of Pigs and with Haiti and with Cuba, all sort of connected through these different associations. And that this guy, it was a Bush associate named Bill Leidecke, who paid off Howard Hunt, who was a CIA agent, to get him out of jail so that he wouldn't talk about being involved in the JFK assassination. That this guy, Howard E. Hunt, he is like just a troublemaker, and he's going around telling people like, yeah, I killed JFK, you know what I mean? And then when he gets stuffed up in jail, he basically lets the establishment know, like, hey, if you don't get me out of here, I'm going to start singing. And I guess instead of just murking him on the spot, they actually do pay to get him out of jail.
I guess this is pre-Epstein, so they didn't really understand that it's a lot cheaper just to let him hang himself.
The 9th one was that, again, Oswald was working for the CIA. This one does give a few extra cool details that we didn't hear in the first two. One is that Oswald was an FBI informant. So he was also working tangentially for J. Edgar Hoover in a way. And they even say that his FBI informant number was S179 and that he was getting paid $200 a month. That when he died, he had a Dallas FBI agent's info in his wallet, and that J. Edgar Hoover noted way before any of the JFK assassination went on, he noted that someone was using Oswald's identity while he was in Russia, but there was another Oswald or someone using Oswald's name to buy trucks in Texas. So he was, again, is another example of Lee Harvey Oswald already being on the radar of the CIA and the FBI way before any of the assassination actually happens. I thought that was kind of interesting, and they also gave all that detail. And then finally, the 10th claim that I've noted here is that George Bush Jr. killed JFK Jr. That while this is literally while Bush Jr. is on the campaign trail during the day, he disappears and he's not seen for 3 days. The press doesn't know where he's at. They're not getting any sort of feedback from him and the questions on his campaign. And that the day that Bush disappeared, that night, JFK Jr.'s plane went down. So it's one of those things where they're like, wow, isn't this interesting? But there's really no other evidence other than the fact that Bush disappears for 3 days that aligns with when JFK Jr.'s. And they go on to kind of make this idea that, well, if Bush Sr.'s initiation into running the CIA was, hey, will you help us take out JFK? Well, maybe that was Bush Jr.'s initiation rituals. Like, hey, just like your dad, we need you to take out the JFK Jr. Wouldn't that be fitting? The Bush Sr. has to kill JFK Sr. and then Bush Jr. has to kill JFK Jr.
Yeah, it's a great storyline, but like, there's no pieces. Like, you're not piecing it together. You're like, well, John Chris wasn't there, and he was in the same city as JFK. Just gonna say, you know what I mean? Like, that's so vague. Some of that claim that's the parts that frustrate me with some of these films. I appreciate they're trying to question things and trying to shake things up, but sometimes it's frustrating where you have this open-ended, like, maybe I'm just saying it's possible, and you're like, yeah, technically it's possible, but like, is it actually practical?
I always want to be like, where were you? Where were you when JFK Jr.'s plane went down, my friend? All right, let's talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. What were the hidden treasures and the overboard moments for you in this movie?
Unfortunately, I won't say there's a lot of hidden treasures, but I'll get the ones for me was a lot of the forensic and like going over like the actual body, even though I seen a lot of it in the other films, but I could appreciate them talking about the restructuring the skull. That was like important for me. But that's kind of like limited because a lot of, unfortunately, they also are under the bad of me seeing both films before this, right? So like everything that they said almost entirely, I'm like, yeah, I heard that before. So it was not a lot of new information. The only one that got me is what you had just spoke about was the Oswald being an informant for the FBI, which we knew Jack Ruby was, but we never heard Oswald. I've never heard that claim anywhere else. So that was pretty interesting, but it's very limited on the hidden treasures for me.
Yeah, my one note for the hidden treasures ahead of its time. And I think that kind of summarizes what you were just saying, that again, that we are at a disadvantage here, that we watched 3 different documentaries all about the exact same thing, and they all kind of touch on the same notes and everything. So maybe I'd have more notes if this were the first one that we watched. But yeah, after seeing the first 2, I feel like this one just kind of does a lot of the same stuff. Again, they do mention the FBI informant connection, which didn't come up on the first 2. So that one was interesting. But I just had a long list of kind of overboard and just bad notes on this. So those might be more fun to talk about anyways. So let's see. 45 minutes. Okay, the name of this movie is called JFK 2, The Bush Connection, right? I actually had a note at a certain point. I was like, I haven't heard the name Bush come up at all. It comes up about 45 or so minutes into this documentary is the first time you hear the name Bush come up, which is weird since it is like literally in the title of the movie. So I feel like they didn't do a great job of marrying those ideas together. And obviously the Bush connection was just because of the flavor of the day. And then it kind of gets shoehorned in at the end. He does a lot of work on it, but it's not like perfectly mixed in. It's almost like oil and water. There's like a definite first part and a second part to this documentary, despite being chopped up into 4 sections.
I thought we were going to hear nothing but about Bush. I thought it was going to be from Prescott, or maybe even the Prescott's father and the Nazism and how it's all rooted in America. I thought we were gonna go further on that than everything is a rich man's trick. And now I know this came out before everything is a rich man's trick, but I was like, okay, maybe this is where he got the info from, right? Like maybe he got some of it, but they didn't really dive into it as I was hoping and expecting.
This one is maybe just more of a stickler thing, but man, the microphone this dude used, I can almost envision it. It was one of those ones that came with your PC in like 1998. The little like one on the wire with the hard plastic on the top, right? The little wand. Yeah, this was one of those like $7 wand microphones because you can hear it crackle and just peak when he gets too close to it or too far away. And I wouldn't say that this takes away from the documentary. If anything, it might give it that conspiracy theory charm a little bit. But also, man, if you spent this much time and effort into recording this whole documentary and he animates stuff, and this was not just like a weekend podcast for this guy. This was definitely a long investment of time and effort. I think it would have been worth just shelling out $40, $50 for just a slightly different microphone. Because again, like you can just hear how bad it is in certain parts where he screams or he's trying to get loud for some sort of emphasis, but you just hear it bottoming out on the mic.
And I don't know if it would cost what the cost would be in that time frame, the early 2000s, but I would almost say also just get a different narrator. Like, his style was not for me, and like he's like, hey, well, Nazi, and like he's trying to add all these little flares that like I get it, like he's like talking crap to the video, and he has these little voices, and he's a little arrogant and almost full of himself. It kind of reminded me of like a nerdish Michael Moore, like a nerd Michael Moore fan, like someone that was obsessed with his films and must have been like watching some of that and like kind of it just had that esque of like the little like that's what I was saying the beginning of the leftists.
He does a really horrible Nixon impression, and at that point I was also thinking like, man, why not just get someone else narrate this for you, or just don't do voices? Like if someone had to have seen this and been like, dude, come on, like that doesn't even sound like Nixon, but you can also, this movie in such a strange way that doesn't help it. It has these really horrible South Park visuals and a lot of MS Paint stuff where like the dude just opened up MS Paint and drew, a person getting shot or something, or like Bush on a boat, and then tries to animate it in just really weird ways where you see the background moving with the foreground. Like I appreciate the effort 100%, but it didn't add to the credibility. And in fact, this makes this movie something that I don't think I'd recommend to anyone unless they were already so deep down the JFK rabbit hole. And they're like, hey, you ever seen like a really weird one that maybe I haven't come across? Maybe I'd suggest this one, but this is not one to suggest to Gam Gam over the Thanksgiving table or to show to anyone. Cause then you're halfway in and you see him showing like, Mike and Philip from like the Canadian South Park guy, or I can't remember their two names, Phil and something.
You're on somewhere around there.
So I mean, it just loses some credibility for that, and then also at the end, you can tell that they are of a certain persuasion. Maybe this is like the Bush syndrome, where it was in early 2003, but it's like, we are grateful to South Park, The Simpsons, PBS, the Discovery Channel, the Learning Channel. And one of the points, they're even like, everyone knows that Richard Nixon was evil. Look, here's a clip from The Simpsons that have him dressed up as the devil. See, isn't that enough proof? If The Simpsons say that you're bad, then clearly you're bad. And I just felt like I was, in Twilight Zone a little bit, especially at the end, because the first thought I had was like, is this the same Discovery Channel that has put out their own debunkings of the 9/11 sort of Architects for Truth claims? So now we're saying like, oh, well, I love South Park and Simpsons and PBS and Discovery Channel. And it seems to eliminate credibility for a conspiracy documentary about the JFK assassination, which we've seen in previous ones, that they had all of these corporations under their thumb.
And let me go back to those little crude drawings, man. That did really hurt the film for me. Like it's like was watching like a pre-adolescent like psychopath like trying to explain a story to me where I'm like, okay, man, let's institutionalize this guy. And to your point, he kind of discredits himself with everything. But I think the hard part is that we're in 2025. So if we were going back then and I was trying to get my head wrapped around while I was doing my notes, like, you know what, this guy is totally different. But that's why I was saying earlier, the seed of where we're at now, because they were conspiratorial in some senses, but they were still complicit of like, hey, yeah, let's listen to the media. Like PBS has my best interest. Like the Simpsons are what like solidifies things for me. Whatever they say goes.
Yeah, and again, like this is ignoring the fact that Bohemian Grove and Epstein connections to the Simpsons and like the disproving like 9/11 debunking stuff. It's very convenient to leverage the credibility of mainstream media on one hand and be like, see, look, mainstream media agrees with me. And then immediately be like, you can't trust anything that mainstream media says. Look, here's my own research. Like you can't use the two in the same time unless you're looking to just like ruin your credibility. And then speaking of that, this documentary also makes some pretty grand and sweeping claims that just seem completely wrong. Like, I'm sure that he had his own thought pattern, but for example, this is a direct quote: American slaveholders invented state-sponsored racism. Now, I'm pretty sure that racism probably predates America, right? And like the concept of the state predates America. So, I mean, even if you go back and I don't know, like watch Spartacus, which is even that far back, right? That was state-sponsored racism and slavery as well. So again, one of those weird claims that somewhere in the process of making this documentary, it shifts into just like crapping all over America in general, which doesn't offend me. I'm not saying like, oh my God, now I don't like this documentary because it's stomping over America, right? But it was just that it was a weird sort of like left turn out of nowhere in the middle of this documentary. And then he starts talking about American slavery, and then he starts talking about the Native American genocide, and that just there's something inherently violent and corrupt with all Americans because look, we're just based on, you know, slavery and racism. And then he shows Holocaust images with the people starving, and but it's really non sequitur. It's not as though he's actually talking about anything specific. It's just like, yeah, well, JFK was assassinated and Bush was involved, and Bush is an American family, and Americans killed Native Americans, and America was part of World War II, and slavery happened. So therefore, watch this clip of The Simpsons and South Park. I rest my case. Like that was kind of how the ending of this movie wound up, and it kind of fizzled out for that reason.
That's what gave me the Michael Moore feeling, right? Like that was Bowling for Columbine, like how we went through that film. It's the same kind of concept of where you're like, guns are bad and there's a little bit of, but let me go tell you this other stuff because racist people once had guns and those guns killed people. It had the same feel. It was like that meme, like corporate wants you to decide which picture is which. And you're like, yeah, that's the same. You could tell he was very inspired by Michael Moore, in my opinion.
And then I gotta save the best one for the last. This was the biggest sort of overboard moment for me. And it's this weird, non-rational legal logic that he strings together. So the claim that he makes in this documentary was that guy was talking about Howard Hunt, the one that had to get sprung out of jail, otherwise he was going to spill beans on being part of the JFK assassination. Well, someone writes about him in a magazine article about him being involved in the JFK assassination, right? Even though he himself was like bolstering. So anyways, that gets written about. Howard Hunt he sues this magazine for libel, for like printing lies about him that could ruin his life. It was called Spotlight Magazine. So he tries to sue them for libel for printing a quote from Richard Helms, who was running the CIA at that point. Richard Helms said Hunt was part of the conspiracy. Spotlight Magazine prints this claim by Richard Helms. So first of all, I don't think you can sue a magazine for printing someone else's claim, especially if it's from the freaking head of the CIA, Richard Helms. So it was weird that Howard Hunt is trying to sue the magazine over a Richard Helms quote and not sue Richard Helms. But it was not successful. So Howard Hunt tries to sue Spotlight Magazine. It doesn't go through. This is obviously not a criminal court. This is like a civil court where you sue for money, not for jail time, right? Well, the director of this movie, he goes on to make this weird legal connection. He's like, because Howard Hunt tried to sue Spotlight for libel, but it didn't go through, then that proves that Howard Hunt is guilty of being part of the JFK assassination. So it was like I'm 100% sure that I'm not a lawyer, but that is not how you prove whether or not someone is guilty of murder, is whether or not their libel lawsuit to a magazine went through or not. But I mean, and it feels like this in this documentary, it's like his big crescendo climax moment. And it's like, I've got the smoking gun. I've got undeniable proof. Look, this guy sued a magazine and lost. Therefore, he killed JFK. Mic drop. All right, ripples and waves. Let me just beat us to the punch here. I don't think this one had any ripples and waves. I would be surprised if you had heard of this one before we even did this. Have you ever heard this movie before?
No, it was my first time. Like, and I wasn't even sure if I was watching the right one at first. I was like, wait a second, like, because there was a couple different versions, and then like the way the guy comes off, I'm like, is this the right thing? Because JFK 2, it's just weird because you're like, what's the first one, right? Like, there's not JFK 1 and he's going back, like it's JFK 2, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what's the sequel to? Like, so it kind of threw me off in the beginning.
Well, and to answer that, this was supposed to be the sequel to Oliver Stone's JFK movie. That you see the JFK movie and you're like, oh, I don't really understand everything. So then you're supposed to watch this one after that. And he does a couple times where he'll show a picture of someone from the JFK movie and be like, and they're talking about this guy. And so that was the point. But yeah, to go from Oliver Stone and Kevin Costner in a very dramatic movie and then see this guy moving like South Park and Simpsons sprites around on the screen in MS Paint. It's a little bit finger painting versus Michelangelo in a way, but I don't really think that this had ripples waves beyond that. The main reason that I even remembered this existed is because I accidentally downloaded it when I got like a huge torrent full of Alex Jones movies, and I ended up watching this one. And the first time I watched it, years later, I was like, oh yeah, I think that was an Alex Jones documentary, but it clearly is not. It's just some other guy, John Hanky guy, right? And it is kind of funny that his name is Hanky and he likes South Park, so you know that he liked Mr. Hanky or whatever. And then there's this ending song where he sings like a version of the movie in lyrical form. I feel like that everyone should hear that at least once, but yeah, I don't think it would make any ripples and waves. All right, sink or swim.
To sink for me to the bottom. I mean, it was cool. It was kind of entertaining, bits and pieces. I did not like the narrator's voice. I did not like his style. I just thought like he had a throwing things at the wall, hoping they stick, and then doesn't even really admit that. And he's so arrogant that he feels like he's solved the whole thing. And like, hey, dummy, you're not figuring it out. I already figured it out. Watch it a couple more times, and maybe you'll get it. And I didn't like that aspect of it. And I don't mind either. Like, you can shit on America if you want, but like, make it cohesive, right? That, and what really set him at a disadvantage, this film, is that I saw the Oliver Stone first, which, if you watch both of those together, you're going to be like, oh, this other one's like trash, bro. Like, I give him credit for like, hey, you independently put it out. It's not easy to do things like that, but he was too all over the place. It's like a leftist Q mentality, right? Like, it's like, connect this and the White House is in there, and the cross dressers and the FBI are going to save us. I'm not sold, man. The whole Nazi, we know that. I agree that the Bushes probably did prop up the Nazis in some sort. There's a lot of evidence to back that up. And the title's misleading. It's not even the connection. It's like, yeah, Bush Sr. was here and he did this. Here's a little memo. And then here's Bush Jr. He kind of was on the trail, missing for 3 days, and JFK Jr. dies. Like, it's not threads for me, so it's a definite sink.
I mean, same. I don't have a whole lot to add on to that. The one redeeming quality maybe is at the end of this documentary, he does shout out all the books and other videos and documentaries that he watched in order to create his. And the one thing where I think a majority of the interesting information about Bush came from that unauthorized biography of George H.W. Bush. So, I mean, if you're interested in the Skull and Bones connections and the Bush, JFK, and Nixon connection, just read that book. It's like 700 pages or something. It's well worth the read. But yeah, I think I have to give this one a sink just because of how many outlandish claims that it made. I could have maybe even been forgiving about some of them, but as soon as they started like tripling and quadrupling down on the South Park and Simpsons clips, and then even citing a Simpsons episode as part of the case that they're building, they completely jumped the shark for me. Like, I couldn't take it seriously at that point going forward. So ahead of its time in 2003, absolutely, but it has since been surpassed by so many others. I mean, I would even recommend Rich Man's Trick over this one, which I did give a swim, even though it wasn't like the best of all versions. Honestly, I think that you should watch the JFK movie by Oliver Stone and then watch JFK Revisited by Oliver Stone. And then you can probably go and watch the other like conspiracy ones once you have some like ground footing. But yeah, it was a little bit wild to hear the first movie talk bad about Oliver Stone and then see Oliver Stone's. And then the third movie basically talk about all mainstream media and then cite mainstream media. This was a weird collection of JFK documentaries. All right, what's on the horizon for next month? Well, I think we're going to be doing some Christmas-themed documentaries. I even got a couple picked out. I don't. Have you looked into any yet?
I've looked up a couple. I mean, it's a little bit different. I don't want to. I'll show you the list off air, but we're gonna leave this one where you're not gonna find out, and it's gonna be a little Christmas present for you, right? You're gonna get some documentaries that we probably both haven't seen because we're just digging some up just to have it for the holiday season in particular. So there's a couple I got on the list. I'll show you off air, and it'll be a present for everybody, I think.
All right. Well, happy Thanksgiving. And remember, make sure that Gam Gam knows all about the JFK Bush connection.
Peace.
Under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Buried deep, but we're breaking the locks. Footage got clipped, they erased all the shots. They connected dots. Under the docks, under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Yeah, under the docks.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
NASAcomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm NASAcomic.com, go visit NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com. Oh, NASAcomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm NASAcomic.com, go visit NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane. Paper, the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel. When it's real, the real, you will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hate, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb. Distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when a beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.